Now for our feature on H2 Gambling Capital. I'm joined by, I've got Ed Birkin, the senior consultant, and I've got David Henwood, the director with me. Welcome in. How are you both?
Good, thanks Katie. Here yesterday, so really good to be here.
Yeah, good. And what are you excited to see at Ice London?
Well, it's just so good, 2 years, 2 months, it's so good to be back. And just to see, the volume of people here is fantastic. But we're here, we're professional analysts, so we're just sort of walking around the show, making old contacts. We're in the conference yesterday as well, so that was great.
Okay, cool. And Ed, how has it been for you so far?
Yeah, fantastic. The conference was a great thing to kick it off yesterday. There's a very good attendance, and today it'll be interesting to see, how many stands are back, given it's been rearranged for people. But from what we've seen so far, it's a fantastic turnout, which is great to see. Great.
Okay, so first question to you, David. You've highlighted before that the industry effectively has fallen back a decade as the result of the pandemic. Will it return to 2019 levels in the next year or so?
Well, listen, I don't, we're analysts. I think there's some slides that the Clarion guys have very kindly put up, so I don't know whether we're actually going to see them on the screen, but we've got some stats to illustrate this.
Yep,
so, look, we've got to go back to pre the pandemic and what actually happened when COVID hit. It's a significant step change for the percentage of gambling that's gone online. So you can see the spike here in 2020 and 2021. We've actually gone up from sort of 13-14% of all global gambling online up to, right up, almost up in the mid-20s. And the question is, to what extent that's going to keep going. Obviously, we've got a little bit of a correction, as the land-based industry catches up. But we're sort of talking about this could be the decade of digital where it really accelerates. Next slide actually is the European picture, and this is even more significant. You see European percentage of online interactive share, it's almost hitting up into sort of 30-40%, and whereas percentage interactive globally could reach 30-35%, in Europe it could actually top 50% by 2030.
Wow. And Ed, there's obviously been a lot of publicity around Las Vegas recovery, but outside the US, have there been changes in player habits? And as David said, is this really the digital decade?
Yeah, so even Las Vegas is an interesting one because although the revenues have recovered, it's all been driven by higher spend per player. The visitation's still down quite significantly at what it was in pre-COVID levels, and then I know I was watching your very informative presentation earlier talking about Macau, and that's just been decimated at the moment. Now there's a couple of reasons for that. There's obviously the visitation's been highly restricted, but then you've also got the junkets which have taken a kind of pushback. Macau's an interesting one. It's used a bit of a barometer in terms of how the destinations are going to be seen, are going to recover going forward. Are they going to start bringing digital yuan and start controlling things more tightly? I think Macau's a bit of a law unto itself in that respect, 'cause it's so tightly controlled by what the Chinese government are going to do. I think if we look away from destinations and look more towards just the local land base and talking about whether it's a decade of digital, the betting shops in the UK are a good example. So they recovered more quickly on the gaming machines than they did on the sports betting. All the land-based operators like the Coral, Ladbrokes, William Hill, they talked about how their digital business really grew significantly from the land-based customers going online when they were closed down. And now they're talking about the recovery in the land-based business and getting back to similar levels of pre-pandemic, but that's ignoring the fact that you've lost a lot of shops. So, is getting back to pre-pandemic levels, is that a success when you've got 20-30% fewer shops than you did in 2019? Surely it should be higher. So I think without a doubt, as David showed on those slides, this is the decade of digital. Now we could argue the last decade's been the decade of digital, the shift to mobile, but it's really accelerated across. And while people will go back, there is definitely a cohort of customers who love the land-based experience, they love using cash, they love the social aspect. A lot of people who are outside of the gambling industry don't understand that gambling can be a very sociable experience. It sometimes has a bad reputation. People enjoy going down to the betting shop, putting on their racket at the weekend, and they enjoy that physical aspect, which is very different to just going on your mobile, which a different cohort just find it easier to do so. So there is more of a shift to online through enforced with the closure of the land-based And I think that some of that will stick. Definitely stick, and it is a move to digital. But when you have destination places like Las Vegas, I mean, Las Vegas is going to have an appeal forever, quite frankly, as far as I'm concerned. And as you say, people have already started flooding back there, and I'm sure that in other markets, it will follow. But the non-destination, I think that there's clearly been a shift, and it's never going to quite fully recover, even if the headline show it does. If you're taking out capacity, it's not really recovered to this full extent.
And you mentioned Macau there. What do you think of Beijing tightening regulations?
Yeah, so I think how Macau, how it's been is going to look very different in the future. With the loss of some of the junkets, the tightening down on that, we personally don't see the VIP recovering as back to what it was, and how much of it is going to actually change to be more Las Vegas style in terms of not fully Las Vegas, but in terms of Macau. Las Vegas was a destination entertainment city that has gambling. Macau is a gambling destination. And how much that's going to change to really welcome more of the mass market customers? Is there going to be more shopping, restaurants? Is it going to be more of a destination that has gambling as its heart rather than a pure VIP gambling area? And I just don't, as the regulations tighten, we think that the gambling will obviously still be its main draw, but that you're going to have other amenities around it, other ways to spend your money rather than it being focused purely on VIPs, with the heavy betting that it's been in the past.
And so as we appear to be on the cusp of a global recession, hurrah, do you think that figures from the financial crash will be revisited?
Well, look, I mean, this all sort of lends itself towards the push to online. The sort of the pressures on secondary spend. As budgets tighten. Are less people going to travel? Are they going to actually physically go to land-based properties? The temptation is, perhaps to go online where it is more accessible, it's easier. If you're more confined to the home than perhaps you were previously. That's another reason I think why we're sort of predicting, it might be quite a step change into online, because of the tightening of the economy generally. We saw this actually when there was a big Chinese slowdown in 2015, we had a sort of we'd done some analysis. I don't know whether the slide's available, but we did some analysis of how all the different product verticals were resilient to change, and actually, gaming is the one that really suffers. Obviously, the land-based gaming. It suffered in 2015. It suffered in 2008, 2009. 2015, obviously suffering through COVID. But if you look at lottery in particular, lottery has actually proved much more resilient through an economic slowdown. Here you go. So, we're predicting that's the interactive lotteries in particular is a big growth area, perhaps the biggest product growth area, in addition to betting, because of the opening up of the North American market as well. So,
and is the US growth enough to offset declines in other markets, do you think, David?
Wow, it's gonna have a major impact. I mean, it is. Everyone talks about sleeping giant, but it is really, a huge market. But it's not the only one. You've got other markets opening up around the world. Potentially Brazil later on for the FIFA World Cup this year. That sports betting market is going to be big, and then as we move into sort of Africa, longer term India, the Chinese market, the Japanese market, well, they start to open up as well. So. I mean, there's potential for growth, in all parts of the world, because it's still, somebody once told me that the industry is still, it's like a sort of 13, 14-year-old teenager. It's still got to fully mature and grow up, and we're definitely thinking this is the decade where that could happen.
But I mean, in terms of the US, it's interesting because obviously everyone's been talking about sports betting, which has really taken off in a number of states, as far surpassed where we thought it would be at the moment doing it. But iGaming's still the one which, although actually regulated before sports betting with New Jersey, that's the one that's really got the potential growth going forward. So if we look at our forecasts, we have betting, growing the fastest because we know how many states have regulated and that's going in. But iGaming's the one that you look at and go, well, hang on, that could be the real step change. And you're talking about recession. So lottery's always been viewed as recession-proof, and we've seen that in 2008, 2009. That was the only one that actually did grow. But even within that, so there's certain markets where you have Spain, where the lottery is so big, it's actually more discretionary spend than other markets. So that lottery declined. But generally, you've got lottery that's recession-proof. We've got the shift to online lottery, which again in the US is so far behind other markets for such a progressive country in general. The iLottery spend in the US is tiny. Hardly any states have any iLottery. That could be a huge growth driver going forward when you get iLottery. So we've got the iGaming, and then sports betting is, as everyone knows, is growing quickly. But even that, it gets a bit more complicated because there's concerns about, is sports betting growing because of the underlying strength in the market, or is it because of such high bonuses? You know, and what's being reported by the regulators in terms of the sports betting market size in the US is very different to what's actually being reported by the operators, because they're giving away so much free money, because it's such a competitive market, because it's so lucrative, you know. And so I think the potential in the US, as Dave said, Latin America, Brazil, is a big one everyone's talking about. Potentially Japan sports betting, you know, the Canada with Ontario opening. There's still so much potential. You know, being in Europe, being in the UK, you think it's a mature market, but globally there's so much potential in so many different areas. It's still a really exciting, you know, sector to be in.
And so iLottery has the biggest growth vertical, which is interesting when the private sector is becoming more involved. Do you think that the private involvement has a factor in the growth? David, if you want to take that.
Yeah, it's a bit of both. I mean, definitely yes. So you're seeing, you know, sort of professional, you know, companies coming in to manage lotteries. Obviously, you know, we've had that for quite a while in the UK here. The change of the contract from Camelot to Allwyn, you know, you'll see a major change there in terms of the lottery industry, you know, over here in UK and London. But yeah, I mean, throughout Europe, that's starting to happen already. But it will also have a knock-on effect with the monopoly structures as well in the lottery sector. So, you know, that will have the extent to which those lotteries that perhaps have been a bit traditional in the way they're run, they will start to see the opportunity there is in online and interactive and really start to play catch up, if you like. So yeah, I mean, that whole shift to entertainment is a really interesting area. You know, you see a lot of the big global brands now, they're starting to sort of move away from that terminology of gaming and gambling into the entertainment field. You see with companies like Entain, obviously it's in the title, Flutter Entertainment, Allwyn, Kindred. If you look at all their vision statements, it all talks about moving into an entertainment space. You know, so there's a very subtle change, which is going to attract more of a mass market into the sector.
That's really interesting. The charts showing the onshore and offshore growth and declines in the Netherlands, Germany, and Brazil was particularly illuminating. The Netherlands have obviously taken steps to limit the offshore market. Germany and Brazil had large grey markets prior to regulation, yet they are moving in opposite directions when it comes to channelization. Why is that?
Okay, so I'll go first on this, and I know Ed's got a lot of comment on this, but this is a fascinating area in terms of the way the markets are regulated and getting that balance right. We did a major report this time last year into what makes for a sort of optimum market regulation, and you got some examples here on the slides of where a couple of countries are getting it right, and then there's another that maybe there's a bit of scope for change. So the Netherlands has done a lot since it newly regulated to try and eliminate the offshore. The restrictions are still quite tight in terms of a high tax take, but if you look at some of the other charts we've got, Brazil in particular, where the market's still to regulate, but the fact that the 24 state lotteries are now offering sports betting has meant there's more of a move onshore. And then Germany is the last one. Now this is the different one, where you're seeing the offshore market still staying relatively high. And I know, Ed, you've got some thoughts on this one.
Yeah, so, I mean, Germany, so that was, I was looking at the web traffic, and they put significant restrictions in, and while a lot of operators were kind of doing a wait-and-see approach, or even complying with them, a number of offshore operators weren't, and there wasn't the enforcement stopping them. So we saw the offshore market triple in size pretty much overnight, over the course of a few weeks, just because that was the place that the customers could go and get what they wanted. So, you know, we were at a conference yesterday. There's a very good session talking about channelization and player protection. And what you need to do, I suppose, is two things. You need to encourage the operators to want to get licensed, and that's where Brazil is in a strong position because, I mean, you've got Sporting Bet, Bet365 over there, probably the two biggest operators, and although they haven't got licensed yet, you'd assume that the licensing there will come onshore. So straight away, they're bringing all of those players across to them onto the onshore market. So that's a massive hurdle that's gone. Holland's done something a bit different. So they've decided to have a cooling off period and allow places like Holland Casino and Toto and people who weren't online before in the grey market to kind of almost catch up from the offshore operators. So at the moment, there's a bit of a strange period where you have players who are the likes of Kindred and Betson and Leo Vegas who are kind of maybe deciding, are they going to go on the newly regulated sites, or are they going to wait until the sites that they've been playing on before get regulated? But then you've got Germany, where even with the best will in the world, you have operators who are getting licensed. The players will go on there and say, actually, it doesn't give. They're not allowed to offer me what I want, so I will go on a site that does. I don't care if they're licensed and paying tax. I don't care if I'm player protected. I just want to bet on what I bet or play on the gaming side on what I played before. And then you have companies like Bet365 that stopped offering gaming altogether in Germany because the product they can offer is just not deemed worthy enough of even having a license there. So they'll just offer the betting. So there's completely different ways it's done, but regulation's been the driver of the industry for a number of years. I mean, when Italy was the first country model and the growth there, paying tax, but then the growth in the market, everyone thought that the regulation was just the golden goose. And then next you had France, who decided to have a punitive turnover-based tax rate in sports and no casino products. So, every market's regulating differently. I think generally we've seen what we call more progressive or welcoming regulation that encourages player protection, encourages, operators to come on shore, but you still have these little nuances in some markets that means the offshore market is just staying stubbornly high and higher than you think you'd really want to see if your primary goal is protecting the player by having them playing with licensed sites.
And David, you have said before that the US market share might close. Is it likely that we will see at least one of the early leaders fall away or get acquired?
Oh, this is what everybody, what is going to happen, because, you've got a couple of brands really pushing out here in the American market and starting to take quite significant market share. It's a big, big market, and there's still, you've got to say there's still room for new innovation to come. There's a lot of money being pumped into some of the marketing that's going on, and a couple of those companies, DraftKings, FanDuel, they're obviously got sort of legacy marketing from daily fantasy sports where the brands are just really well known, but at the end of the day, product quality will probably out in terms of who has the best website, who has the best app, in terms of the brand that will really survive. And you're probably still not seeing the innovation that you have in Europe yet in terms of the quality of the products in America, and maybe that's still to come.
Yeah, I think the US customer at the moment, they're happy to be able to bet on anything. So at the moment they've got the brands that they know before, who's put it out there, want to spend the most marketing, and they like it. But over time, as David said, you're going to get product innovation. They're going to be more sophisticated. They're going to want to demand more. And you've seen that with FanDuel, where they're having same-game parlays, and they've really taken a step. Now, we track on the US sports betting, we track on a monthly basis the operator share in every single state individually and then gross it up. And the chart that we show, you've got FanDuel and DraftKings up there, and everyone we speak to, most people we speak to, just assumes that that's how it's going to stay. Maybe FanDuel's got 22%, DraftKings 22%, they'll stay between 20 and 25. FanDuel's got 35. But I think people are going to be surprised because one of the big operators there, I think, is going to probably not be the same share they are now, and there's going to be an operator that isn't there that will be. So if we look at the UK, first moved online, you had William Hill, Ladbrokes, you had the land-based guys who had the brand, who were straight away the market leaders. But then you got Bet365, who was the most innovative and had the most breadth and depth in product, who then came in. I mean, they didn't even exist before online. But then everyone thought that was how it was going to stay. And then Skybet came along, who really got mobile rights and went for the more casual customer. and they suddenly came up in the rankings at the detriment of some of the more traditional ones. You've got Australia, where you had effectively a duopoly for the commercial ones of Sportsbet and Sportingbet, and Sportingbet doesn't even exist over there really anymore. So, just because the early market leaders, we're only a couple of years into US online sports betting, and I think it's very dangerous to assume that the market leaders now, obviously some of them will stay there, but I think there's going to be, if we look in 5 years' time, they could look very different chart than what it does at the moment.
So we're looking at a potential disruption here. So could it be from within, a kind of Bet365 style brand catching up and then taking over, or do you think the disruptor is yet to emerge?
Well, I mean, so David likes to talk about some of the sports side. So, in the UK you had Sky Bet that did phenomenally well. I mean, it's a great success story, part of Sky. And then we thought that Fox Bet, especially because it's really part of the same team, that they could be the ones that has this media sports partnership that really goes. And I mean, quite frankly, it's been a bit disappointing what they've achieved. But there's other big brands out there, like the ESPN, etc. Dave's got a view on some of the sports. Is there going to be a big media brand? You've obviously got Bet365. I mean, let's not beat around the bush. They're the biggest global sports betting company in the world. I'm sure at some point they're waiting for the bonus, over the top bonusing spend to kind of come down. They don't have. They're not a public company. They don't have to. They can take their time, and they've done that in other markets. So I think you've got to always watch out that they could be, at some point, they could be a powerhouse there. But I think, ESPN, for instance, or one of the sports betting companies, they think they could be the dark horse when they decide what to do.
Oh, looking for the dark horse. I'm going to have to stop you there because we've run out of time for our interview. But thank you so much, Ed and David, for coming in and talking to us on ICE 365 Live. Enjoy the show.